death sentence turned into a misjudgment. Edgar Smith, the cunning murderer who twisted justice with his pen. Despite the looming death sentence, Edgar Smith refused to surrender. During his time on death row, he used his cunning nature to transform himself from a cold-blooded murderer into a pitiable victim in the eyes of the public, achieving this with nothing more than a sensational piece of writing. As a result, he escaped the death penalty and relished a life of luxury before once again falling into the clutches of the law. The tragic case of a 15-year-old girl and the vague clues. In the early hours of a cold winter morning on March 8, 1957, the hum of a car engine echoed through the quiet rural roads of Mahwah Township, New Jersey. Tony and Mary Zielinski were desperately searching for their 15-year-old daughter, Victoria Ann Zielinski, Vicky, who had not come home the night before. The last thing Vicky had told them was that she was going to a friend's house for a study session. Feeling an ominous sense of dread, the couple drove through every street and alley, hoping for a sign of their daughter. Suddenly, they came across a familiar sight, a single woman's shoe lying by the roadside, along with a blood-stained headscarf. Alarmed, they immediately called the local police. Following a trail of suspicious evidence, investigators were led to the end of a cul-de-sac, which opened into a sandpit. Behind blood-stained rocks, they found Vicky's lifeless body. Her face and skull had been crushed, her clothing was disheveled, and her body bore multiple bite marks and bruises. Nearby, in the woods, officers discovered a bloodied baseball bat. Prosecutor Guy Calisi would later call it the most brutal and savage murder I have ever witnessed. At first, investigators were left with scant clues. A light blue Mercury convertible had reportedly been seen near the scene on the night of the crime. Then, something unexpected happened. The owner of the Mercury came forward voluntarily, bringing his car to the authorities. He explained that a friend had borrowed his car that night to get gas. When the car was returned, he noticed a small, dark reddish stain on the front seat. A baseball bat had also been inside the car. Adding to the suspicion, the friend had changed into fresh clothes before returning the vehicle, claiming he had spilled something on himself. Piecing these details together, the car's owner expressed his concerns that his friend might be involved in Vicky's murder. Acting on this information, the police quickly identified and arrested Edgar Smith, a mechanic who lived near the crime scene. A handsome killer with a talent for fabrication. Seated across from the police in the interrogation room, Edgar Smith, a slender 23-year-old with piercing blue eyes, recounted his alibi with unsettling composure. On the night in question, he claimed he had borrowed a friend's car to buy gas and promptly returned. Along the way, he felt sick and stopped to vomit. However, there was a glaring inconsistency. Edgar took the car at 8:20 p.m., and the gas station was just 2 kilometers away, yet he didn't return home until after 9 p.m. When questioned about his clothes, he said they were too dirty and had been discarded. The police immediately demanded that Edgar show them the spot where he had vomited and the location where he disposed of his clothes. Both searches yielded nothing. Later, his shoes were discovered in a street-side trash can covered in blood. His trousers, found in a nearby forest, bore no vomit stains, but were stiff with dried blood. Edgar, of course, denied ownership of the pants until police brought his wife in for questioning in a separate room. With a single statement, "Yes, those are his pants," she effectively ensured that Edgar would stand trial for first-degree murder, an act both deliberate and gruesome. Edgar's criminal record revealed that, as a minor, he had received a 5-year suspended sentence for attempting to sexually assault a 9-year-old girl. Now, Edgar shifted tactics. After undergoing 3 psychiatric evaluations, he claimed to have completely lost his memory. This excuse failed to convince the court. From here, he concocted another story, dragging Hommel, another friend, into the tragedy. Edgar alleged that Vicky and Hommel were romantically involved. That night, Edgar said he gave Vicky a ride, but asked her to get out of the car when he deemed her behavior inappropriate. She was injured and begged him not to let Hommel harm her again, but Edgar ignored her pleas. Through his rearview mirror, Edgar claimed to have seen Hommel's car approach and Vicky climb into it. When they later met in town, Hummel supposedly threatened Edgar into silence. Still, Edgar couldn't explain the bloody shoes and trousers or the illogical, heartless nature of his story. Why would he leave his best friend's girlfriend alone on a cold, dark night after she was already injured and begging for help? Moreover, Hummel's car and clothes were completely clean. Hummel denied knowing the victim, let alone being romantically involved with her. The prosecutor argued that Edgar, frustrated by the victim's refusal, committed a heinous crime in a fit of rage. After 2 hours of deliberation, the court found Edgar guilty and sentenced him to death. A stroke of luck on death row. As a death row inmate, Edgar's life revolved around eating, sleeping, and passing time in solitary confinement at a New Jersey prison. To keep his mind occupied, he solved puzzles, studied statistics, and drafted countless appeals. With each passing day, Edgar's life seemed like a dwindling matchstick. However, in 1962, a stroke of luck changed his fate. A journalist discovered that Edgar was a loyal reader of his work and began corresponding with him, initially to gather material. Although the journalist found some of Edgar's stories implausible and illogical, he became captivated by the convict's storytelling style, describing it as, at times, sharp, cautious, curious, brazen, and emotional. The journalist admired Edgar's intellect so much that he offered to purchase the literary rights to his letters for publication. Edgar declined, stating that he was writing a book himself. Over time, the journalist became convinced of Edgar's innocence and published articles defending him. Edgar's case gained national attention when a lengthy article appeared in Esquire magazine in November 1965, highlighting the inconsistencies in the investigation. Seizing the opportunity, Edgar published his book, Brief Against Death from Prison, turning public opinion in his favor. In the book, Edgar reiterated his previous claims, implicating Hummel and introducing a new villain, the victim's father, whom Edgar described as abusive and manipulative. He also cast doubt on the key evidence that had convicted him, the blood-stained trousers. In powerful prose, Edgar accused the police of fabricating evidence and misleading his wife. He argued that his trial had been unfair and that he had been coerced into a confession. Brief Against Death became a bestseller, convincing many that an innocent man was on death row. In 1971, Edgar filed his 19th appeal, shifting his focus from innocence to procedural unfairness. The U.S. Supreme Court ordered New Jersey to either release him or retry him within 60 days. Facing the prospect of a new trial with uncertain outcomes, the state offered Edgar a deal: plead guilty to second-degree murder and be released for time served. On December 6, 1971, Edgar admitted to acting alone and acknowledged that the blood-stained trousers were his. He claimed, however, that a mental defect had driven him to commit the crime. Medical experts deemed him a sociopath, but stated he posed no danger to society. At 37, Edgar Smith was released, becoming America's most beloved ex-death row inmate. He toured the country, lectured at universities, and appeared on numerous radio and TV shows, earning $1,000 per appearance. From a cold-blooded killer, he had reinvented himself as a symbol of justice gone wrong. The Fall, the final act. One October afternoon in 1976, 33-year-old Lisa Osborne was waiting for her husband in her company's parking lot. Suddenly, a car pulled up, and a man forced her at knife point into his vehicle. The assailant was Edgar Smith. Lisa fought back fiercely. As Edgar drove, he held the knife with one hand and the wheel with the other. The car swerved and eventually stopped on an incline, allowing Lisa to escape, despite a knife wound to her side. Edgar sped off but was quickly identified and arrested. This time, Edgar's luck had run out. His supporters, stunned and enraged, realized they had been deceived. In court, Edgar confessed to kidnapping Lisa for sexual gratification. At that time in California, kidnapping for robbery carried a life sentence if the victim was injured, whereas kidnapping with the intent to commit sexual assault carried a sentence of around 15 years. Remarkably, he also admitted to the murder of a 15-year-old girl years earlier, claiming he was motivated by remorse, not leniency in his current case. Despite his theatrical display of guilt, Edgar was sentenced to life in prison for kidnapping with intent to rob and attempted murder. Through the 1980s and 1990s, Edgar's health deteriorated as his appeals failed. Although he was eligible for parole in 1989, community protests ensured he remained incarcerated. Edgar Smith spent the rest of his life in prison, passing away on March 20th, 2017. The elaborate narrative of his wrongful conviction finally unraveled, ending a lifetime of deception.